Hey there, it's Heather Hakes. Welcome back to my channel. Before we get started on today's video, if you are new to my work, I invite you to visit my website, heatherhakes.com, and opt into the free life assessment. It's my gift from me to you. It's a great assessment to take to help you understand where you are to where you want to go, because without awareness, how are you ever going to get there? Again, visit my website, heatherhakes.com, and take the free life assessment. Welcome to today's interview. I brought on Zehr. Jerry, welcome.
Thank you. It's good to be here with you and your listeners.
Thank you for joining. Please give listeners a little background. Where do you live and what do you do?
Well, I live in Carmel, Indiana, which is a suburb of Indianapolis. I've been an ordained minister working in interfaith ministries for the last 35 years, but I just retired. And now I've written this book, The Peacemaker's Path, and I work on trying to build understandings for people between different religions, our faith, our connection to God, and how to fill a more fuller life.
I would love if we could even go way further back and how you got started in this, maybe if you want to call it a spiritual awakening, but where did you begin to bring you to today?
Well, I grew up in a very conservative background. My grandparents were Amish. I grew up Mennonite, very legalistic. And so I left church, I left God, all that stuff. I went out into LA. My degree was in speech and theater. I went into the entertainment business. I was performing out there. And I sang on the Johnny Carson show, and I performed at the comedy club, and I did some of these things. And I was getting a lot of accolades. But, every relationship was transactional. What can you do for me? And inside, I was very empty. I was very empty. But I thought that all churches or all religion was like what I grew up with. Well, out there, I became exposed to people of other faith traditions, people of other teachings and writings that gave me a new concept of God, not as this being out there judging and righteous, but more the higher power, the universal intelligence, the unified field, whatever language you people want to call it, but that which is of love, drawing us and helping us to live a fuller life. And so I began my own spiritual awakening that way.
And where did you start?
Well, I started reading, I started studying, and then I went to seminary because I wanted to have a more authentic and a better way of talking about my faith. I mean, I never believed that 3/4 of the world were going to go to hell because they didn't believe like my church or my religion, but I didn't know how to talk about it. And so in seminary, I came to understand a different way of that, just because we're taught certain things doesn't mean they're true or that we have to believe them to be true. And so I realized that a lot of teachings about religion or God or about finding happiness, I just didn't buy into. And so when I became in seminary, I became a minister and I started working, trying to help empower people to find kind of the divine. And I saw God not just outside of us, but within us. I really believe God is in everything. If God is energy, if love is at the core of the universe, and that energy of love permeates everything. And how do we be connected to that, to the divine within and beyond us that can give us a sense of fulfillment and inner peace?
Well, and I asked you a question before we started recording, and that was, what do you believe our purpose here is? And you said to experience the fullness of life on earth. And a lot of people say we're spiritual beings having a human experience. But look, I think a lot of people in this 3D realm are living a lot of struggle and suffering and lack and scarcity. And that is not who we are or what we're here for. So how do we help in this paradigm shift and waking people up to realize there's so much more where we already have it?
Well, and that's why I appreciate your podcast and your listeners coming here, because it really is about what do we choose to focus on? What are our thoughts? That's where I began. I used to be a very anxious, perfectionistic, very critical, hard on myself. I was very driven when I was in the entertainment business. And that's what I found was those thoughts, the critic voice inside of us that used to tell me, Jerry, you're not good enough. If people really knew you, you'd be no good. You can't measure up. You're lazy. All that stuff were just really thoughts that somebody else, either I grew up with telling me or society told me. And then I realized, I read the book, The Untethered Spirit. And that was the first beginning of saying, I don't have to let those thoughts stay rent free. I don't have to live in fear if I want to choose to focus on goodness and hope. But that takes a lot, for me, it took a lot of work on being intentional about what do I want to let my thoughts focus on.
Okay, so the word you use there that I feel like I emphasize a lot is being intentional or being mindful. So how can we be that, want to call it a gatekeeper of the thoughts in our head? Because you're right. Why are we letting these limiting beliefs hang out rent free?
Well, I think it's because, at least for me, I listen to that critic voice or those voice more than my friend or my therapist or my minister, because it's almost like they were just there. And then when I realized they don't have to be there. In fact, it was like people would give me a compliment and I'd go, oh no, that's thank you, but not really good enough, and I found myself pushing all that stuff away. When I started realizing, let that compliment come in and hold that compliment. And so when I would get notes or cards from people saying, thank you for what you did, I would keep those and then I would start to read those back. Or if I got in a funky mood and felt depressed or maybe a little anxious, I started making a list of things that I was grateful for, things that I was blessing. Well, as soon as I started listing the things, I'm healthy, I got a house, I have a wife that loves me, I have this, I have those. Now my whole mood changed. And that's when I realized, wow, what I focus on in my mind and my thoughts will get manifested in my life.
So I think you gave a perfect, simple example. And I remember years ago when it has to come with compliments. I think women especially are the worst at accepting compliments. And my mom told me, when someone gives you a compliment, whether or not you believe it, just say thank you. But that made me think, and what I wrote down here is the universe is trying to give us things all the time, and we are not open to receive. We are repelling compliments, money, love, connection, job, success, all these things we desire, we're repelling. So how can an attitude of gratitude, yes, I completely agree, but how else can we open ourselves to receive everything we're worthy of?
For me, it was learning to love myself. I think we're good at loving others, but it was about learning how to give myself forgiveness, like I would give other people forgiveness. It was about being able to really affirm some of the things that I was good at and feel good about that. And, I was taught not to be prideful, that somehow that was wrong. And that's not really good. I mean, to be self-centered, only think of yourself and not others, okay, that can be an extreme unhealthy. But to feel good about yourself, there's nothing wrong with that. And in fact, that's what I think God wants us to. Again, in all of the teachings of the major religions, they all talk about the sense of finding that sense of peace and being a peacemaker, how we can help bring peace in the world. But you have to first feel that sense of your own love of yourself. And so sometimes I'll ask people, tell me 3 things you love about yourself. And I can't tell you how many times people have a hard time even listing 3 things that they love about themselves.
Do you know, and I've asked similar questions even with coaching clients in the past. If somebody's in a really bad attitude, they're just in a down spiral, woe is me, life sucks. I ask one question. I'm like, tell me something you're grateful for. And this has happened more than once. And they'll sit there And like, I have nothing to be grateful for. I'm like, tell me just one thing, just one thing. And it might take them a minute or two, but then they think of one and then they think of another. And all of a sudden they just rambled off a list of many things they're grateful for, but it's because I got them to change their focus.
And sometimes people just don't feel worthy. I mean, they just don't feel like they have any of that. And or maybe they get so stubborn and they're so bitter and hard. And that's where that forgiveness begins, starting to forgive somebody else. Maybe we're harboring, maybe somebody who's listening is really still angry or hurt. They've been wounded by somebody else and they're holding on to that. And what I found when I got hurt by somebody, that person went on. They didn't even care. They didn't know that they hurt me. And all that really hurt was myself by harboring my anger and my bitterness. Finally, when I started to think about, well, maybe this person, and had some empathy towards them, maybe this person was having a bad day. Maybe this person misunderstood me. There was many different reasons that I could begin to forgive them, was a way of setting myself free, in fact.
Yeah. I was just that's when you were saying that, that's what I thought of. Forgiveness sets you free, because I love that. And maybe was it Buddha that, holding a hot coal is expecting to hurt somebody else when it's like you're burning yourself, or drinking poison. Again, it's hurting you, not the other person.
I think that's what I loved about doing the research of this book, was because when I read the teachings from the Hindu scriptures, Buddhist teachings, Baha'u'llah, and the Baha'i faith, the Sikh scriptures, Jesus's teachings, and they all had these same themes to them about forgiveness and forgiving others, or learning how to love yourself. Boy, it just reinforced in me that there was this universal wisdom, this consciousness, something beyond ourselves that want us to live into harmony with ourselves and our world.
So, Jerry, how do we rise up and experience this heaven on earth?
I think, we began with the word intentionality. I think I would have this in my mirror. If I had an intentionality of something I wanted, or something I wanted to be set free from, or to focus on, I'd put it in my bathroom mirror at days. The other thing is I had people who have surrounded me that I would share with them, that I surrounded people who were good, positive people who helped me live into that. And if I had negative people who I stepped away from, we talked about this. I've had family members who we just were at odds with. And if I talk about religion at all, I get lambasted and I get a lot of shame and guilt. And so I just disconnect from that. And even if they're a family member, if I'm not going to put myself in a position that I'm going to be belittled or diminished, and I don't want to do that to another. So I think it is about protecting our mind and our heart, and having an intentionality of what we want to have in our life.
So there's so many teachers that I can think of, especially ones that I study and follow. And it is, Abraham Hicks, who we both have followed or listened to. I love
Right.
Abe, and Abe talks a lot about the emotional guidance scale. So if you find yourself in the low vibe emotions, guilt, anxiety, worry, fear, you've got to raise your vibration up, because the whole like attracts like. So if you're sitting in these low vibe emotions, you're going to experience the lack, the scarcity, more of the same, right?
That's right. And a part of that is becoming conscious of what you're feeling. For a long time when I was younger, I didn't pay attention to my emotions. I had a zero emotional intelligence. I love that word, emotional intelligence, because now we're celebrating that we should appreciate our emotions. For me, as a man, I was cut off. I was all intellect, and I didn't know how to deal with my emotions. So I just swallowed my anger. I swallowed my fear, my anxiety. Well, when you swallow your emotions thinking they'll go away, it just made me depressed. It wasn't until I came to some self-awareness and an understanding of those emotions. And in fact, anger is okay. It's more how you use anger. If you blow up and yell at somebody, that's not good. But if it motivates you to change, that's okay. So coming to some self-awareness was very important for me about my emotions, and then being able to find a way of letting go of some of those shame and the guilt that I had been taught, that I said, I don't buy it any longer.
Well, I think what you hit on there is emotions are indicators. And so, what I talk about often is the thought cycle. Our thoughts create our emotions and feelings, which lead to the actions or inactions we take, and ultimately our results in life. So, your emotions can feel they're your indicators of what your thoughts are. So, if you're sitting in this funk, that's what I call it, sitting in this low vibe state, you can go, oh, that's an indicator. Okay, what are my thoughts? What am I focused on right now? But then when you're also feeling high vibe, you're elated, you have so much gratitude, you have joy, pay attention to that too, because what are those thoughts? And then make this conscious, intentional, mindful choice. Okay, I want more of those. I want less of that.
Right. And and some of us have came out of some really hard backgrounds, a lot of trauma early in our life. Maybe there's been abuse or molestation or different things that have happened that really have these streams of thought that are just so prevalent, because that's what we grew up with. And so to change that mindset, that brainwave, is not easy to do. It can work, but and I'm 66, and honestly, I started working on this when I was 35, and it wasn't really. It took me 20 years of just hard, intentional work before I really started feeling a sense of inner peace. But all the way, I was feeling better, growing, feeling empowerment, empowering others. And so, it's all a process and a growing. And I think if we can give ourselves that grace, or that sense of cutting ourselves some slack, being easier on ourselves, not being so hard on ourselves. So when we're doing things, we're doing the best we can. Nobody intentionally sets out to get married to get divorced. Okay, we got married, it didn't work out, we got divorced, but we learned a lot. It was part of our growing process. I didn't intentionally take a job to get fired, but I lost my job, or I went bankrupt. There are things that happen. Life is hard, but it is part of that, going through those experiences and saying, what can I learn? What can I grow? How I can become a stronger person is part of that journey that we can get there.
I want to challenge you on that one phrase you just said.
Okay.
Life is hard.
Oh, thank you. You're right. Life doesn't have to be hard. If we say it's hard, it's going to be hard, right?
I just think life is what we make it. But those people, and I'm not going to say it, but the acronym FML, that used to be the big rage in the last few years, it's just like gross. And life doesn't have to be hard. Life can be, as Abe says, you can be downstream. Life can be easy. You can be in flow. You can be in alignment, or opposite end of the stick. Life can be hard, but you get to choose.
Yes. No, I think you're right. Thank you for, in fact, calling that a little bit, because isn't it interesting? Our language is very important. And if I say life is hard, it's going to be hard. If I say life is good, and so we say we can create heaven on earth or hell on earth, right?
Yeah, but we get to choose. Okay, so can we touch on that for a minute? Free will and the fact that we are co-creators. What does that even mean?
Well, for me, one of the things that a myth that I always bothers me is when people say, oh, it's God's will, or God's in control. And we do that to comfort people. When somebody dies, they say, well, it was God's will, or maybe something terrible happened to us. And we say, well, God had a purpose for that. And I think that gives away so much of our power. One, if God is love, if the essence of God is love, and the universe is love, God doesn't want anything bad to happen to us. Things happen in the world because of our humanity. We're not perfect. We're all on this journey together, but we have choices, free will, that people say in religious terms, or just that you have choices. And I talk about being a co-creator Because if God is in everything and present with us, I can just choose to ignore that. I can become, when I was just in the entertainment business, I wasn't even thinking about God or about any of that. It was all on my own. What can I do for me? How can I get ahead? And then when I had the spiritual awakening, I realized I can tap into something greater than myself that can give me wisdom. And then, it was interesting because as I put that out there, prayer, I did it through prayer. I did it through my own intentionality, whatever ways. Other people started coming into my life that were such positive effects. I found doors opening up. Sometimes doors would close and then I would trust. I would say, okay, that door closed, but I think that there will be something that will actually be better for me. And I'd be open to that. So co-creator for me means I can participate with the divine to create my future.
Well, and that's big of you to be able to, and that is easily said than done sometimes, but to let go of the past instead of focusing on that closed door, which I think a lot of people do. I am guilty of doing that. And instead be like, all right, that was closed for a reason. There's another door. There's a window. There's other things out there. So just, and something we talked about again before recording was the power of presence. So maybe you could talk a little bit about presence.
Well, I think it is something for me as a person, a recovering, anxious, perfectionistic. I was either looking to the future or about the past. And I missed the moment. I mean, I was so worried about getting the project done, getting onto the next project, moving up the ladder, whatever it was. I missed the moment of where I was. And there's sacredness in these moments where we are. Our conversation right now is so just empowering to me. I get shivers a little bit because I enjoy this conversation we're having, because it lifts me up, and I hope your listeners are feeling lifted up and to be aware of it. So sometimes now I'll say, when I'm with other people, what do you notice right now? What do you notice, rather than what did you get out of that session? What did you get from this? What do you notice? And I'm being aware of the present moment. That's why mindfulness, meditation, breathing has been helpful to me to quiet my mind, just to be able to enjoy this present time.
Yeah, I agree. Well, and Eckhart Tolle talks a lot about that, right? I think that's what he's most well known for, is the power of the present moment. And even when I find myself stressed out and I'm complaining to my mom's like, are you okay right now? Are you okay this moment?
Right.
Okay.
Well, and I used to have my things I worry about, and then I'd realize I can't do anything about them anyway.
Yeah.
Why are you worrying about them? Well, because that just was part of my upbringing. I just worried. My father worried. I worried. And I thought, if I thought I worried more, it would get better. When I realized worrying only made it worse. And so that's when I started to decide, how I'm going to change it. My anxiety, my anxiousness was my own fear, and not trusting myself, trusting that things were going to be okay. Trusting ourselves, and that things will work out. I mean, that's very important. And when you're younger, it's harder. I mean, again, the things we're saying are easy to say and have, it takes some effort for them to move, to grasp, but they do. Having been one who's come through that, I want to tell you, doors have closed, and I have always felt like that God, that oneness who's been there with me, guiding me as I've been open to that, my life has been so blessed. Somebody asked me if I was a wealthy person. I said, I'm a millionaire. And they said, you have $1 million? I said, no, I got $2,000 in my savings account, but I have $1 million of blessings. I've just been blessed. And I think it's because I've been open to that, and I've given. I think when we give and when we share that and try to unselfishly be there for others, we get so much back, which is, people talk about karma. Jesus said, you reap what you sow. What you put out there will come back. The law of attraction, as the secret in that. That is a universal truth that the Hindu scriptures that are thousands of years old from India, the Vedas, talk about.
Yeah, for sure.
Nothing new.
Right. And sometimes I even call it like the boomerang effect. What you put out, you get back.
But all these things are new age. No, they're not.
Yeah.
These teachings are the teachings of very essence of the fulfillment of life, have always been here if we can choose to tap into them.
So you're saying it's not woo-woo?
Not woo-woo at all. In fact, people think it's woo-woo or it's new age. And again, when you look at these teachings of the great teachers, that have come over thousands of years, they don't say exactly the same thing, but they're all saying the very essence. And for us to find that sense of fulfillment, enjoyment, it is about loving ourselves and then loving others. In some ways it's simple, but we've made it hard, especially in our society today, where we're taught over and over again that it's not enough. You have to have better this, more that, the expectations are there. You're talking about women and their sense of feeling guilt. And it was staggering me to learn that girls, starting at the age of 11, feel inadequate about their body. They're already feeling like they're not beautiful enough, they're not sexy, they're not pretty enough, or whatever. Because society has already done that to women.
I'm going to tell you it's actually earlier. And the only reason I know that is from observing. I have a 10-year-old niece, and she started talking about this stuff when she was about 8. And I was like, why, as an 8-year-old, are you insecure and not? So it's much younger now.
Oh, I think, again, and we have to watch how much we protect our children from watching the TV and the media, and even for ourselves, how much do we protect our mind and our heart from taking all that in? Because our society is set up. Mother Teresa said we were one of the wealthiest countries in the world numerically, but spiritually we're one of the poorest in the United States.
Yeah, but I think we touch on that too. I don't think that anymore. I really do feel like
I do.
All of this, let's call it chaos, this craziness that has been almost 2 years now, there is a mass awakening. So change is good. Things are happening. It's just,
I think each generation, I do too. And look at your podcast. You've been doing this for 4 years, and now, it's, people are enjoying. People are wanting that. And I think the pandemic has made people look at that, and how can I find that? I feel isolated. Yeah. And so thank you for the good work you're doing.
Yeah. Okay. So I feel like we've touched on a lot today, many different topics and subjects. If you could give listeners one key takeaway, what do you want people to get?
I want people to love themselves, to be easier on themselves, to give grace, meaning cut yourself some slack, and give yourself that sense of love yourself as God loves you.
Yeah.
Or your mom loves you. Or your father loves you.
All right. So I'd like to ask you a few rapid fire questions to wrap up the interview.
Okay.
What is a quote or motto that you live by?
A quote or motto that I live by, live life to its fullest.
Yes. And you know what I like about the most simple ones like that is it's because I feel like it is so simple. And the movie Soul, which kept popping up while you were talking, I love that, by Disney. Okay, it looks like you've seen it too.
Yes.
Soul and many other teachers, it simply is telling us to do what brings you joy. So living to our fullest expansion is to follow that joy, and we will always be taken care of and guided. That's how I feel.
Oh, I love that. I love living into your joy.
Living into your joy. I'm writing that down. What is a book you're currently reading or highly recommend?
The book that I highly recommend is The Untethered Spirit.
By Michael
The book,
Singer?
yes,
It's
by
The
Michael
Untethered
Singer.
Soul.
Thank you. The Untethered Soul.
Yeah.
It was Oprah's favorite book, so I love Oprah, so I
Yeah.
read it, and that was the beginning of this whole being aware of the thoughts in critic voice.
Nice.
Yes.
Yeah. He also wrote The Surrender Experiment, which is another great book.
Yes. Yes. The Four Law Agreement by is another about the 4 laws of agreement. But anyway.
The Four Agreements, Don Miguel Ruiz.
Yeah. Thank you. Okay.
Yeah. So I only know that one. Number one, I talked about it earlier today, but number two, it was the first book I read. So I was 15, and that was my first quote self-development book.
Wow. I'm impressed that at 15 years old that you were reading that book. I was reading Playboy. So that's okay.
That's what Santa would put in my stocking. So
good for your mom. Good for Santa.
Thanks, Santa. All right. Final question. What advice would you give your younger self?
Oh, I think it's both of those things that I touched on earlier. I wish I would have enjoyed the present, slowed down, and just enjoyed and not tried and not be so overachieving, because honestly, all those things that I worried about and tried to achieve, all were secondary, and I enjoy the richness of life so now much more than I did.
Well, what a great note to end on. Jerry, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for having me. And I hope for your listeners that, if there's some of them who are out there who are feeling a little discouraged or distraught today, that they'll know the power of love, of God's love for their life, and that the joy that they can find living this life.